Hi everyone, Holly here. I have another episode for the book series. And the one I've chosen for this episode, it actually isn't a spiritual book, but it is an incredibly powerful book. I recommend it to so many clients. And the book is called Crucial Conversations, Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High. And this is work that I was actually first introduced to when I was working in the corporate world. And I used to do things like executive coaching and leadership development and those kinds of things. And Crucial Conversations was an enormously powerful book in the workplace. And what I've found since then is it's also an enormously powerful book in our relationships. And so what it is, there's 5 different authors here. It's, as you can see, it's not a big book. It's a really small book. And it's a very practical guide. It's that they don't talk about theory, well, maybe a little bit, but not a lot. But what they mostly talk about are very specific, practical ways to change our approach to conversations, including down to what words to use and what words to say in a very emotionally charged situation to make the conversation productive. It's about having productive conflict, the ability to hold productive conflict in our conversations. So it's not about avoiding conflict, and it's not about having conflict that goes into anger and yelling and hurt feelings, but there's a middle road. We can have very emotionally charged conversations and keep them safe so that they're productive, so that everyone in the conversation gets to contribute what they need to the conversation. So it's about making it safe to talk about almost anything. We're all going to need this skill at some point in time. How many times have we avoided a conversation because we were afraid? We didn't want to hurt somebody else's feelings, or we didn't want to have our feelings hurt. So how much of angst and energy do we put into our worry about the conversation beforehand, or about not even showing up to the conversation in the first place? And so a lot of this is about making sure that your purpose and intention of the conversation, that you understand that, and that you're always honing your skills to be able to make it safe to have emotionally driven conversations. And there are many, 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 many techniques in this book that help you do that. So on this video, I want to share 2 specifically. So this is from Crucial Conversations, and the authors are Patterson, Grinney, McMillan, and Switzler. They actually also have lots of other products in terms of training and training for groups and individuals and those kinds of things. They, I think some of the authors used to work for Stephen Covey and that group. I don't think they still do. But a lot of research did go into the book, but it isn't theoretical, it's very practical. So I want to share just 2 techniques that are in the book that might be of interest to you. And the first technique is about making it safe to have the conversation. And the primary technique there is to make sure that everyone in the conversation understands your purpose and intention in the conversation. So many times conversations go poorly, emotionally charged conversations go poorly because the other person doesn't really know why you want to have the conversation. Usually most people tend to think the worst and think that maybe there's some judgment or some blame or even some shame that might be going on in the conversation. And that makes the conversation unsafe for them. And so one of the techniques is if you very openly state and understand your intention of even holding the conversation, to make sure that the other person knows your motivation in having the conversation, which means you have a little bit of homework to do. You have to go figure out what your motivation of having the conversation is. What do you really want out of the conversation? Only by openly stating that at the beginning of the conversation can we have an emotionally charged conversation that is safe for everyone to be in. So I want to read just a little bit out of the book in regards to this. So this is a sample conversation, and those are packed in the book here. All kinds of sample conversations and ways to practice and ways to get good at this skill of having a crucial conversation. This particular example is about setting that intention for the conversation to make it safe. And the setup here is it's a couple. It's a man and a wife having a challenging situation in their marriage. The wife is Yvonne and the husband is Jotham. So Yvonne says, I don't want to suggest that this problem is yours. The truth is, I think it's ours. I'm not trying to put the burden on you. I don't even know what the solution is. What I do want is to be able to talk so that we can understand each other better. Perhaps that will help me change how I'm responding to you, too. So Yvonne has very openly stated her intentions, her motivation to have the conversation. Jotham replies, I know where this is going. We talk, I continue to get rejected, but you get to feel good about yourself because we've communicated. Have you been reading your self-help library again? And so Jotham comes back immediately with sarcasm. He doesn't feel safe having the conversation. So Yvonne comes back and says, seriously, honey, I'm not interested in discussing why our current relationship is strong and healthy. I can see that it isn't. I merely want to talk about what each of us likes and doesn't like. That way we'll be able to see what we need to do in order to improve and why. My only goal is to come up with some ideas that will make both of us happy. And Jotham changes his tone and his demeanor, and he says, really? I'm sorry to be so insecure about this. I know I'm being a bit selfish about this, but I don't know how to make myself feel differently. So that's just a brief example of the kind of content that's in this book. How different conversations can be held differently. And there we see Yvonne in the conversation being very insistent and steady in stating and restating her purpose of even having the conversation. And once her motivation is then clear by the other person in the conversation, then the conversation becomes safer for everyone else involved. So that's the first technique that I want to share in this particular book. The second technique, one of my favorites. So the first technique was make it safe. Make it safe to talk about almost anything. And you make it safe by being very transparent about your motivation. The second technique is called Master My Stories. And based on some psychological research that the authors did, they came up with a model that helps us understand why we behave in the way we do. And so a lot of people think, well, we see or hear something, then we feel an emotion, and then we take action based upon that emotion. And what the authors found out, that isn't the case. That isn't the case at all. In fact, there's a big missing step in there. What actually happens in our minds is we see and hear something, and then we tell ourselves a story about what we saw or heard, and then the story lends it to an emotion, and then based on that emotion we have a behavior. So there's a step in between there. See and hear something, tell yourself a story, feel an emotion based on the story, and then you have some sort of behavior. So the stories that you tell yourself about what you see and hear are what drives your emotions, not what you see and hear. And so if you can change your stories about what you see and hear, then you can actually change your emotions and you can change your life. So here's a little snippet from the book about Master My Stories. Emotions don't just happen. You have to have a story to tell yourself to make the emotions happen. And this particular segment that I'm going to share, again, Crucial Conversations, is a little testimonial, I guess you might say, some feedback about a woman that has used this particular Master My Stories technique. A woman named Kathy. And she says, my first husband was abusive. As a result, my 3 children grew up in an extremely violent home. They never saw me physically abused, but they saw the aftermath and experienced emotional and mental abuse. After 16 years and 8 attempts to leave, I finally broke free. My physical wounds are now healed, but I still struggle with the long-term psychological effects the abuse caused me and my children. When emotions run high, I tend to go to silence or sarcasm. And after hearing so many unhealthy conversations, my now adult children simply mirror behavior they saw in their childhood. They fall into old patterns of disrespect and expect me to respond the same way I responded in the past. Kathy says, I have used crucial conversation skills in many situations and know through firsthand experience that I can not only master the stories that kept me locked in old behaviors, but I can also reduce stress and gain renewed confidence in my day-to-day conversations and decisions. I recently used these skills to increase safety in conversations with my daughter, who, because of drug abuse, lost custody of her children. In previous conversations, I became silent when she displayed her father's hot temper, and I wanted to help her regain the ability to care for herself and ultimately visitation rights with her children. My goal is to be my daughter's friend and to speak honestly and directly without making her feel threatened. I try to make it safe for her to share her story by watching her body language. As soon as she shows signs of frustration, I stop and remind her that I'm on her side. She's reiterating her motivations for the crucial conversation. I use contrasting statements such as, I know this is difficult and I don't want to upset you. I just want to make sure we consider everything we are dealing with. Next, I ask for permission to explore those areas. And if she's willing, we continue. If not, I apologize for upsetting her and ask her to tell me when she is ready to talk about it. I have also found tentative statements to be effective. Instead of saying, are you upset with me? What did I do? I now say, I'm beginning to feel that you're upset with me. Did I do something to make you angry? Her response to this question opens the door to the real issue at hand. In the past, the first 5 minutes of a visit with my daughter were agonizing. I found myself fighting my old tendencies to go to silence or to be sarcastic. I was afraid to open my mouth because no matter what I said, I always seemed to upset her. I've now mastered my emotions and rethought the story I told myself that convinced me I would never be able to hold this crucial conversation with my daughter. I state my views factually and with confidence because I know my intentions are good and I know she wants to get better. As a result, we now have longer discussions and she's usually able to leave the conversation without having an outburst. This is amazing progress and gives me hope for the future. So, even when things are lifelong challenges, and from tragic events such as abuse or drug abuse or spousal abuse, we can still use these kinds of techniques to begin the healing process. The way that we talk to each other makes a big difference. And having the skill set, building those skills to be able to effectively communicate with other people is critically important also then to that healing process. So, another one of my favorites, another one of those that has changed my life, not a spiritual book, but a very practical guide of how to talk when the stakes are high. Highly recommend. Thank you for listening.